The Senate Education Committee. For the record, Lori Hartog, State Senator, District 22. Senators, it's my pleasure to be in front of you this morning. This is how these legislative days work, right? We get a little mixed up in our days. This afternoon, really continuing the conversation that this committee and our Senate body has been having, not only for the last several years, but in particular this session. So we had considered previous legislation in this space to help kids and families and to give them a different opportunity in their education choices. So the proposal for you today really is a modest proposal that builds on the success of an existing program that we have, the Empowering Parents Grant Program. What is in Senate Bill 1161 really reflects and has attempted to address many of the comments and concerns and things that I heard not only in this committee discussion, but on our Senate floor, trying to figure out what a path forward might look like. So what the bill does, as it relates to the existing Empowering Parents Micro Grant Program, which as it stands today is $1,000 per student with a max of $3,000 per family with a mix of eligible education expenses. Those can include computers, technology, curriculum. We have educational therapies, tutoring. There's a whole host of things that are in current code, how families can expend those funds. This piece of legislation adds transportation for an eligible student to an eligible education opportunity as an expense that can occur under just the micro grant program. So that is something that would operate under a reimbursement model. The other thing that this piece of legislation does, currently this program is housed under the State Board of Education. In consultation with the State Board and the State Department, we are proposing to move this program to the State Department of Education, who's willing to run and operate this program. So you'll see those changes throughout the bill, references to the board taken out and references to the department replacing that. And then, of course, probably what everyone is here for, the portion that this piece of legislation adds is a tuition grant program. It is truly a pilot program. It is for up to 2,000 kids for $6,000 in a tuition grant that could be used for a non-public school or the hiring of a certified teacher for a micro school. So two uses for that for that tuition grant program. The way the legislation is drafted, this is a 5-year pilot program that would automatically expire unless the legislature 5 years from now were to take an affirmative action. However, it does not sunset the existing micro grant program. So the two things are separate. So in 5 years from now, if no affirmative action is taken on that tuition grant program, it would sunset, but the micro grant program would continue to stay. You'll notice in the fiscal note, and I think the Joint Committee just took action on this, either if it wasn't this morning, it was earlier this week, but the micro grant program, for the first time, the governor had proposed $30 million in ongoing state funds. We had not previously had ongoing state funding for the micro grant program. Empowering Parents started as Strong Families, Strong Students during the pandemic, and that was funded. There were two different funding streams, federal funding streams that we used in two different 50 million tranches. And the governor's proposal this year is the first time we've had ongoing state funding. We did have ongoing state funding housed in the board for the operation of the micro grant program, and that is proposed to shift over to the department as well, again, already in the budget. You will notice on the fiscal note for the calculation of the number of students that would be eligible to receive the tuition grants, it's up to 2,000 students per year, so that would be $12 million. The way the application process works, and you'll see that in the legislation, is that there would be an application period from January 1 to April 1 where all students would be eligible to apply for the tuition grant. At the closing of that application period, the department, in this case, would prioritize families that have the lowest income. They would receive the highest priority in receiving the award of that tuition grant. So while we don't have a set cap or a set distribution like we do under the microgrant program. The microgrant program goes out kind of in, we talk about it in waves, is the way that the state board has implemented it and the way the law is written. The tuition grant has a set application period, so families can apply. And the fiscal note says we won't need that $12 million until next fiscal year. And the reason that is because January 1 of next year would be the first time when the tuition grant application period would open. And then those families, if they are eligible, would receive notification next May and then have the funds available to use the following school year. So we're not talking about any additional funds for this fiscal year, but we would need to make plans and preparations for fiscal year 25. A couple of things I want to note. We've talked a lot in these conversations about accountability and what does that look like and how do we do that and how do we achieve it. For me, so much of this goes back to the conversations that we've had when we talk about how do we use funds and how do we know that this is working for kids. And I've shared with many of you, I know we look a lot at test scores and we talk a lot about test scores and I've shared with many people, and like when it comes to my own individual child, a standardized test doesn't mean that much to me. I want to know from my child's teacher, are they thriving? Are they growing? Are they learning? Are they being respectful? And that's really the heart of the accountability in here. If this is working for a child and for their parent, that's number one in accountability. And then the question is, how do we understand if the taxpayers have protection and accountability for how taxpayer funds are being utilized? So a couple of things. We have already, under the microgrant program, required annual reporting. So the tuition grant would fall under the standard reporting that has to happen with the microgrant. In addition, we've added some language that reflects some involvement from the state controller's office as it relates to Transparent Idaho. So we have an understanding of regionality, income levels, without disclosing people's personal information through Transparent Idaho. The taxpayers would have an understanding of where and who and how these funds are getting used. And then the other thing, in the 5-year evaluation report that's required in this legislation, the State Department has to report back, and this would be under consideration for a future legislature if they were to choose to remove the sunset. That report has to evaluate the sustainability, accountability, and the participant outcomes. So we don't quite know what that might look like, but I can tell you the state board has already done a focus group type interview with the participants in the microgrant program, and we've learned some interesting things. We've learned some interesting things from program participants in that, and I anticipate something similar. The other thing in here, the microgrant program, and we stood it up, we had a parent advisory panel. We've modified the parent advisory panel in this piece of legislation to give them a little more authority, a little more involvement in this, and I really appreciate the feedback from committee members in incorporating these changes. The parent advisory panel now has an upfront role in approving where the tuition grants could be utilized by a family who has applied. So you'll notice in the legislation that the parent advisory panel has to take into consideration the type of school or entity that wants to be eligible to receive a student with these funds. I'd like to point your attention on page 1, and some of this goes to definitions, so it's important to understand the definitions. On page 1, academic instruction, you'll see on sub 1 there, means instruction in English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies sufficient to satisfy Idaho's constitutional and statutory compulsory instruction requirements. So I'll give you an example where a school maybe stood up that doesn't fit these type of requirements. A couple of years ago during the pandemic, there was a school that got started out in my area, and I'll use the word school loosely, and they were teaching things like sword making, and I'm trying to think of some of the other interesting things that they did, but they were focused more on creative endeavors, and they were not focused specifically. I think it was kind of a collaboration of folks, but it wasn't specifically designed to teach the required elements that we expect kids to learn when we think about traditional schools. So a school like that, I would imagine the parent advisory panel would say, you're not meeting the definition of providing academic instruction. And the same would be true for the micro school for the hiring of a certified teacher. If there were families that gathered together in perhaps a rural area that decided they wanted to start a micro school, they would have to be able to demonstrate through their certified teacher that teacher would be providing the academic instruction as is defined in the legislation. And then in terms of how the payments work, for the tuition grants, they would be, again, it would work like the micro grants, would happen on the digital platform. So we're not talking about monies deposited in someone's individual checking or savings account. All the transactions take place in something that is controlled by the state. And then I just want to hit on a couple of things. I know we have some people who would like to testify. We've been receiving some emails in opposition, and I wanted just to address a couple of the things that I've noticed. So some of the folks say, this diverts money from the existing Empowering Parents program. It doesn't. So we're leaving the $30 million alone, running that through the microgrant program, proposing the $12 million additional. So this does not divert funding from the existing program as it's currently proposed. People talk about that this transforms Empowering Parents, and I would tell you that it doesn't. It builds on it. Does it change it? Yes, but I would say it builds on a foundation of really people being able to customize their education. Another thing that I had noticed in some of the opposition was, this doesn't help rural Idaho. People talk about, that we have parts of the state of Idaho where there are not non-public schools. And that's certainly true. And that really was part of the consideration for including the micro school as an eligible expense for the tuition grants. And I will tell you, the issues are different across the state. We know that. We hear that as we consider legislation. We know that the folks in rural Idaho face different issues than the folks in urban Idaho. And the other thing that we don't know, and I think this is important for why it's set up as a pilot program, and a pilot program really is intended to learn. Like, we're hoping to learn and gather information. Is this something that the people of Idaho want? Is this something that kids and families can benefit from? And I will tell you that, I've had a question in my own mind of whether or not existing non-public schools have capacity to receive students who might be interested in attending there. I think that's also something we're going to learn through the pilot program. And then finally, a question of whether or not this defunds our public schools. And I would argue that it doesn't. It doesn't in any way. We're not proposing the $12 million for each of the 5 years of the pilot program to come from the public schools budget. Again, the Joint Committee took action this morning, which I believe was one of the largest increases we've ever seen into our public education system. And I think the first time, and I would stand corrected by the chair, I believe it's the first time we've been over $1 billion in our budget for the support of our K-12 public schools in the state of Idaho. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, with that, I know we have folks who want to testify, but I'd be happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Senator. I don't see any questions at this time, so we'll have you up to close up. So let me just do some protocols here. You can't speak out. You can only testify if you're on the list. You'll have 2 minutes. Currently on the list, we have 59 people. We will not be able to have 59 people. That is 6 in favor. Actually, no, there's 64 people, 6 in favor and 59 against. So if you're coming up, if somebody's already said something, you're perfectly welcome to pass your time on to someone else, and let's do that. Again, there's no speaking out, there's no clapping, there's no applauding. If you are, you'll notice we have ISP officers in the back, and we'll ask you to leave. Decorum is very important in our process. We have to move very quickly and efficiently. So I will be calling out names, and there'll be 3 at a time. And if your name is coming up, come up to the front and sit in the front. And I think we'll probably go until about 3 o'clock or 5 after, at which time we'll invite the good senator back to do some closing comments. So with that plan.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Senator Warding-O'King.
Will there be a point in time where the committee will be able to weigh in also?
Yes, that's what I was thinking, probably about 3 or 3:05. We'll call an end to the testimonies, and then the committee then will discuss along with after we get the good senator back up here. So we have to be on the floor at 3:30. We will probably, with our discussion and voting, our intention is to vote on this issue today. So we'll probably, depending on how long we discuss it as a committee, but we will take a vote today. So our plan is to go, let's go to 5 after. We'll have the senator close out. We'll have discussion, and then we'll vote so that we can get to the floor by 3:30. That'll be our plan.
Crane said
All right,
the same
so,
thing. He said, we're going to vote today, but he did not. We'll see if
Person
this
to
guy
testify is Anna Miller, then Gene
16
Henscheid,
minutes.
and Paul Stark in that order. Anna is on video. So Gene and Paul, if
There we
you'd
go.
come up, followed by Kathy Dawes.
Yep.
Can you hear us, Ms. Miller?
The senator ate up 16 minutes of this this hearing.
There she goes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we're good. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Anna Miller. I'm the director of the Center for American Education at the Idaho Freedom Foundation. This is Samuel. He won't be testifying today, just me. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 1161. We really appreciate this committee is continuing the work to expand school choice in Idaho. This bill would expand families' ability to choose the education option that works best for their child. Currently, Idaho's education landscape is changing very rapidly. More students are homeschooling than ever. Learning pods and blended learning options are gaining popularity in rural areas. Enrollment in traditional private schools is increasing all over the state. The families using these education options are demonstrating the intense need for school choice in our state. And this bill would certainly help meet that need. Over the past decade, inflation-adjusted spending per pupil on the public school system has increased about 24%. Yet there's been a national shift towards funding students instead of public school systems. About 5 states now have adopted universal school choice programs, ensuring that every kid has access to the best education possible. And more than 30 states now have private school choice programs.
Where's her clock?
Although Senate Bill 1161 is not universal, extending choice to every kid in Idaho, it is certainly a good first step toward allowing dollars to follow students to the school that their families choose. The creation of this school choice program would also incentivize more innovation by encouraging education entrepreneurs to enter the marketplace and provide higher quality products at a lower price. There are a few elements of Senate Bill 1161 which we think could be improved upon. The first is that the bill requires teachers to attain state certification. And the second is that it gives preference to low-income families. However, overall, this bill is a step in the right direction for Idaho. Education policy is about helping every child succeed, and this bill is certainly a first step toward achieving that goal. So I urge the members of this committee to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
I would be happy to stand for questions.
I don't see any questions, so thank you.
There was no clock.
All right, next up is Gene Henscheid, and we're trying to get our timer working here, so.
Oh, okay.
There we go, got it. I think we're back in business. There you go.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lent and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Jean Henscheid, testifying on behalf of Betsy McBride, President of the League of Women Voters of Idaho. The League strongly opposes Senate Bill 1161. For decades, League members from every corner of the state have worked to realize the promise of Idaho's Constitution to provide for a general, uniform, and thorough public education system. The provisions of SB 1161 ask the state to remove funding from that system to pay for a separate system of private and religious schools. The price for receiving state funding for public schools will continue to be strict accountability for student learning outcomes. Not so for private and religious schools that would now be funded by taxpayers. In debate over previous voucher bills, senators and representatives on both sides of the aisle objected to funding private and religious schools with no accountability to taxpayers. While Section 1 of this new bill attempts to address this by listing required subjects under academic instruction, learning outcome measures reported to the state do not exist. In fact, the sponsor just now said those outcomes don't exist at this moment. They're TBD and will be worked out later. Section 2 of the bill details just how independent from state oversight private and religious schools will remain. The sponsors promise that these schools will continue to be autonomous and will be provided, quote, maximum freedom to educate as they see fit. We all recognize this language of separate systems. It is the separate but equal language that was ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. By giving private and religious schools taxpayer dollars, the state is, by definition, making them public schools. Two public systems, two sets of rules, unconstitutional. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Paul Stark, Kathy Dawes, Chris Cargill.
That was the League of Women Voters of Idaho.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Paul Stark. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Education Association. The Empowering Parents Law first appeared in 2021 as House Bill 294. The bill had two parts. One was a grant to parents, and two was scholarship portion that could go to private schools. That bill failed to pass the Senate. Last year in 2022, the same sponsors brought back the bill as Senate Bill 1255, which did not include private tuition. Chairman Lent, Senator Ward Engelking, and Senator Den Hartog sat on this committee when that was debated. I testified in support of the bill as follows. When this legislation first came to light, we expressed significant concern that the language in this bill creates a backdoor for public money to go to private or parochial schools. We've heard assurances from the Office of the Governor, the Idaho State Board of Education, and lawmakers who brought this legislation forward that the tools in this bill will not be used, this bill creates will not be used for offering vouchers. The IEA will support this legislation based upon those assurances. In the words of one stakeholder, this is a trust fall. This is what I said last year. In last year's committee, Senator Nelson asked the bill sponsors the following. I guess I'm going to follow up on Mr. Stark's testimony because I heard from a lot of my education advisors on the concern for private school tuition in this. And it seems to me that capability is pretty close to being ruled out on this. I wonder if you can help me with some assurances that there's no plan for private school tuition under the rug. Last year, the bill sponsors replied, if you were to go back and compare the bills that we had last year, House Bill 294 and this bill, House Bill 294 did have tuition as an eligible expense. We specifically struck that in this legislation. That is not the intent. Now this bill is before you with private school tuition added. For these reasons, I urge you to vote no on Senate Bill 1161. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Kathy Dawes, Chris Cargill, and Laura Fisher. Kathy Dawes.
Not all Green Badgers are against public education, it appears. These guys are. Privatize everything. That's in their platform.
Yes, we're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Chairman Lent and members of the committee. My name is Kathy Dawes, speaking on behalf of myself and my husband Dana from Moscow in opposition to SB 1161. When the Empowering Parents program was first set up, it was funded entirely by $50 million of federal coronavirus relief funds, no state funds, to assist all families who needed help with expenses for educational materials for students to recover from the learning loss caused by the pandemic. That was the sole purpose of that program and the funds. Eligible purchases for the $1,000 per eligible student included things like computers and technology, internet access, instructional materials, tutoring services, and educational services and therapies through approved vendors. It was never meant to pay for tuition. nor was it ever intended to be a continuing program. The pandemic is over, children are back in school, and there is $14 million in federal funds still left over. If this program is to be continued, it will definitely require funding solely from state general funds, funds that rightfully should be spent on the incredibly underfunded public school system in our state, not for private schools. According to the legislature's own nonpartisan Office of Performance Evaluation, Idaho needs
Oh.
out of the 44 counties in Idaho have levy and bond elections for about $1 billion. This should not be happening. We urge you to vote no on SB 1161 because of your constitutional duty. First and foremost is to fund public schools, not private ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Chris Cargill is next.
Do you think it had an impact of what she just said? Do you think they listened? I guess the vote will tell.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We're good.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Chris Cargill, the president of the Mountain States Policy Center. I appreciate the invitation of Senator Dan Hartog to address the committee this afternoon. As you all know, Mountain States Policy Center believes that education choice improves outcomes. We've watched the enormous success of the Empowering Parents program, and the expansion that you're considering today does follow the recommendations that we've made in a recent study on how to expand choice options in our state. We've talked a lot about the availability of choice models in rural communities that might not have a private school, and this is one of the ways that you get there. Throughout the pandemic, we saw families and educators from across the country opening up these micro schools and learning pods and a host of other options that uniquely fit a child's needs. On the private school component, keep in mind, 2,000 students is about one half of 1% of the number of public school students in our state. Less than 1%. This is not a voucher. It's inaccurate to say that. This is an expansion of something that you've already approved. The bill is limited, it has a sunset, and we believe it will be wildly successful over time. It's a pilot. Even if you can help one child, why not try to give it a try? To paraphrase Chairman Lent, this is a journey. This is a process. And this particular expansion of empowering parents may just be the next step in that journey. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Laura Fisher on video, then Georgia Boatman, Jill Rinaldi, Yvonne, Sam Sandmeyer. So Laura Fisher on video.
Sam, okay.
Georgia Boatman and Jill Rinaldi.
The go-on rate of 37% is really indicative of the children being prepared for secondary education and the STEM program. 7,000 STEM jobs went unfilled because they couldn't pass the tests, the entry tests. One major manufacturer here had to lower their passing rate from 80% to 60% because nobody could pass locals at
dropped off there,
80%. So you know, this is incredible. Private
Georgia
schools,
Boatman,
charter
in person,
schools,
are you here? Jill Rinaldi and Sam Sandmeyer.
It doesn't...
Hello, I'm Georgia Boatman. I'm a taxpayer in Boise and testifying for myself. I urge you to vote no on Senate Bill 1161. I'm a twice certified National Board teacher and a recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. In my 40-year career, I've taught special education, first grade, second grade, third grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, and multi-age classrooms. I taught teachers to teach science more effectively. I've worked in high socioeconomic public schools and 95% free and reduced lunch schools. I know education, and I find it a bit disingenuous to pretend that Senate Bill 1161 in any way helps educate all students, regardless of language, ethnicity, special needs, zip code, or socioeconomic status. The Empowering Families program was designed to assist all families who need help with educational expenses, not for parents who can already afford the choice they have made to send their students to private schools. This bill hurts financially challenged parents and actually makes assistance available for all children less in public schools. If you really want to live up to the promise of the Idaho Constitution, I urge you to not to divert precious funding away from public schools, and instead to put maximum possible funding into public schools, so no parent has to struggle to provide their children with educational opportunities. Public education is enshrined in our Constitution. There's nothing in SB 1161 that remotely resembles uniform, thorough, public, or free common schools. It seems to be just one more thinly veiled attempt to wheedle ESA vouchers into our state. Thank you for your time and attention. I welcome questions.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
I don't see any questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jill Rinaldi, Sam Sandmeyer, Blanca Romero, Dennis Boatman. Jill Rinaldi. Jill Rinaldi. Got it. Calling in from Moscow. If there's anyone here today in person that traveled a distance, if you'd let us know, raise your hand and the page will come talk to you. Excuse me, we'll see if we can get you in a testimony if you're here today.
The final vote is what counts, sir, not the testimony. It's taking action as a result of these folks speaking against this bill.
Excuse me.
Looks like to me there's more against it than there is for it that are testifying. But it appears to me that the majority on this education committee have already made up their minds. Do you
Not
think
seeing
that?
Jill Rinaldi. Okay.
5 minutes to go.
Yvonne Sandmeyer in person.
Thank you so much. My name is Sam Sandmeyer, and I'm a resident of Boise, and I represent myself. I oppose S 1144 because I am against turning Idaho's Empowering Parents program into a voucher scheme. I want to correct the record regarding the impact of ESA voucher programs on student achievement. Studies of programs in Louisiana, Ohio, and Indiana have found that voucher schemes hurt student achievement across a range of fields, especially math. A 2018 study published in the Journal of Policy Analysis and Management found large drops in math scores for voucher students in Indiana's Choice Scholarship Program. A 2018 study of Louisiana's statewide voucher program, published in the American Economic Review, found large drops in math scores and significant harm in achievement in reading, science, and social studies. A 2016 study of Ohio's voucher program, published by the Fordham Institute, found similar effects. Dr. Josh Cowan, a professor of education policy at Michigan State University, who has studied voucher programs for 20 years, summed up the research this way, quote, "The bottom line is that the research case for vouchers does not hold up to scrutiny, while the research case against them has been flashing warning lights for almost a decade," end quote. It's not surprising that ESAs and other voucher programs harm student achievement, considering that these programs are never held accountable for outcomes. Please vote no on S 1144. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, so thank you for your time today. Blanca Romero, video.
Let's start my video.
Yes, we're good. We can hear you.
Hello there.
Hello, Chairman Lent and members of the committee. My name is Blanca Romero, and I am I'm a school board trustee for the Blaine County School District, but the opinion I express is my own and does not reflect that of the Blaine County School District. I am here today to ask that you vote no for SB 1161, the Empowering Parents Program. Blaine County has a handful of private schools in the area. Children who attend those schools come from higher income families who do not need handouts to pay for their tuition. Tuition runs from $4,000 to $20,000 per student per year, depending on the school district and on the school and their grade level. Children whose families can't afford these fees go to Blaine County School District. As an employee of the local food bank, I also see hundreds of families with school-aged children who are struggling to make ends meet in Blaine County. So having access to these funds for their children's public education would be a financial boost towards a more equitable education. These funds need to be readily available for those who are in the public schools as they come from public dollars. SB 1161 was originally intended to help families cover educational materials like books and computers, not to cover private school tuition. This bill would divert nearly half of program funds away from public school needs and the children who actually need these funds. So with that, I again ask you to vote no for SB 1161. I thank you for your time and I stand for any questions.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Thank you for your time today. Dennis Boatman in person, Rod Grammer on video, and then Tara Myers on video.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Dennis Boatman. I'm a taxpayer living in Boise. Excuse me. I rise to urge you to vote against Senate Bill 1161. I'm a retired public school educator who turned in my keys after 43 years as a teacher, coach, and administrator. In my experiences, I found that analogies are a useful teaching strategy to help simplify and make more personal relevant issues that seem complex and or detached. Now that I'm retired, I spend much more time camping and enjoying our great outdoors. As stated previously, I rise to urge you to vote against Senate Bill 1161. My argument is based on my personal camping experiences. I'm sure you're thinking, what in the world does his camping experience have to do with this bill? Let me expand. There are numerous public land and private RV parks and campgrounds in Idaho. Public land campgrounds are developed and maintained by our tax dollars. If I stay in one, I may have to pay an out-of-pocket user fee for my stay. Paying campground user fees is like what sometimes occurs in public schools. Parents may need to make extra expenditures for school-related fees or item purchases beyond the taxes already paid for their children's public school education. The Idaho legislature enacted the Empowering Parents Program to provide financial grants to qualifying parents for out-of-pocket expenditures for educational resources to help children succeed academically. Supplementary fees paid by individuals, whether to stay in a public land campground or provide additional educational supports for their children, are used to expand, enhance, and improve the experience. If I choose to spend time in a privately owned RV park or campground, I certainly have the freedom to make that selection. As these sites are not publicly subsidized, I'm fully aware my decision to stay in one will cost me quite a bit more, and that's my choice. The stated purpose of Senate Bill 1161 is to use taxpayer dollars to provide financial grants for partial transportation and tuition costs to subsidize parents who have personally chosen to send their children to private schools with the full knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. We're out of time.
All right.
Thank you for being here.
The senator had 16 minutes of
Rod Grammer and then Tara Myers.
Pretty rude there, Senator. Yep. Eating the clock away here. Probably this will be the last testimony. And delayed.
Mr. Grammer, we can see you and hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rod Grammer. I'm president of Idaho Business for Education. I'm testifying today against Senate Bill 1161. At first glance, the Education Savings Account bill here looks harmless. Sponsors say it is a pilot program. It limits the program to 2,000 low-income students. The cost is relatively modest too, $12 million a year. Yet appearances are not always what they seem to be, and that is the case with this bill. Those national groups that are advocate for taxpayer-funded subsidies for private and religious schools always advise sponsors to start small, make the bill look harmless. Only provide subsidies to a few students, say low-income students or special needs students. But in every case, in states like Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, and Arizona, these privatization advocates don't rest until we have universal vouchers or ESAs. In Wisconsin, for example, the program started small, a few thousand low-income students in Milwaukee. Today, the Wisconsin taxpayers' support for private and religious schools funds 42,000 students attending those schools at a cost of $457 million. In Ohio, the story is the same. Started out serving 3,000 low-income students for $5 million. Today, taxpayers in Ohio finance education of 68,000 students at a cost of $620 million.
Wow.
If this bill passes, advocates for privatization and their lobbyists will be back year after year after year until Idaho has a taxpayer-supported universal savings accounts for private and religious schools.
Thank
In
you.
short,
Thank you, Mr. Grammer. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, you
Okay,
started
thanks,
the
Mr.
clock. Yeah.
Tara Myers.
He was shorted by 60 seconds. Way to go there, bub. And you probably already started the clock. Let's see what the clock says. Okay.
Hi, my name is Tara
Okay.
Myers, and I'm here in support of SB 1161. Chairman Lent and
okay.
committee members, thank you for allowing me
She's
the
got the
opportunity
2
to
minutes
testify.
here. Okay.
I hear a lot from a lot of people about funding systems instead of students. I know change can be difficult. Being a parent of an individual with special needs, I know that it's really important to be able to have the opportunity to choose where your child goes to school or what supports are available to them. So I think that SB 1161 would provide at least a slight open door in that opportunity. It's not an us against them situation. It's not private versus public. It's parent and what is best for students. This is an opportunity to provide parents to decide what is best for their children and in what area and what opportunity. There is a lot of accommodations afforded to children through the IDEA law. However, sometimes public schools do not follow through in that, and parents are left with a hostage situation for their child's education. That is not true for everyone, but there are some. And as a parent that has experienced that firsthand, I think the best thing that we can do is open the door of opportunity for students to be able to be put at the forefront instead of a specific system. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. Wendy French, are you here? She's video, I think. Yes. Okay. Bill Phillips, if you're here,
Hi.
you would be next.
Hi, Chairman Lent and
Yes.
committee members. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share why a no vote is necessary on proposed Senate Bill 1161. My name is Dr. Wendy French. I've been in education for 38 years, mostly in rural Idaho. The overarching impact of ESA tuition grants or any kind of voucher scheme on rural schools is substantial. As a director for special programs in the rural district in South Central Idaho, we simply cannot fulfill what is best for kids with the minimal supplemental funds that we receive from federal government and are present for pupil funding from the state of Idaho. There is no free pass. Public schools are mandated according to Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, to provide services to all students who qualify preschool through age 21. We simply cannot tell a parent, we can't serve your child today because we don't have enough funds. This is not an option. Finally, we know that Idaho's per pupil funding is at the rock bottom in the U.S. Any voucher program scheme will simply draw more from these already limited funds. My plea is for common sense, adequate per pupil funding for our public schools. I ask you to vote a resounding no on S 1161. A no vote is what is best for Idaho Public Education and what is best for our Idaho students. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I stand for any questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you for your time today. We'll end with Bill Phillips. And while he's coming up, all of those who came today, thank you for your time. We apologize that we didn't have time to get to everyone. But thank you for taking time and trying to participate today. We appreciate it very much. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you. Chairman Lent, members of the committee. I'm Bill Phillips. I'm with the American Federation for Children. We're here in support of S 1161. It strikes a fair balance between the desire to provide more education options and the interest in having a firm cap on growth and cost.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm actually going to use the rest of my time to actually answer a couple of comments or speak to a couple of comments that were made.
See the green badge?
You've heard a lot of talk, or you've seen probably a lot of talk around the country about states moving from having small programs or no programs in terms of private school choice to universal. In fact, what you've heard is that we do it small and then we grow it out. States like Iowa, Utah, Arizona, Arkansas, I frankly was involved in Iowa. It went from having no program to a universal. The reason it happened is because that's what they wanted. That was what they voted for. I mention this to you because we should be really clear. This program that we're proposing today is not the same thing. It's not close. It's a reasonable effort to take into account the concerns and the conversations that have happened through much of the session.
How much money did you pay these guys? So did you donate?
In terms of the test scores, I'd like to just give you a little advice that you probably want to get
Idaho
a fuller body
Secretary
of
of
evidence.
State Sunshine Report.
My personal preference is on random control tests.
Put all the names of the
it comes
committee that
from
vote
my
for this
experience in the
turkey.
charter sector, where for years we were not able to do that because it's actually just it's difficult
This guy probably
to
has a
do.
bag
And
of
every
money
time we gave
running
good data,
around
we
in
were
the
told,
Idaho
well, you're not using the
legislature.
gold standard, you're not using
And
random
other
control
places,
tests.
if he's been to Iowa.
If you use random control tests, what you'll see is arguably as it relates to
I
student
think teachers
performance,
know
the data
a
is
lot
mixed,
more
but it's
about
mixed towards
education.
positive. There's been
than
11
these
positive studies.
for-profit
There's been
guys.
4 negative, as in positive
with
impact,
bags of
4
money to,
negative impact, and 2 with no impact.
To donate to
Again, my last comment will be, we hope you support the bill, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
All right. I don't think anybody's going to ask you anything.
Mr. Phillips, I don't see any questions, so thank you for your time.
Yeah, good riddance, buddy.
Again, thank you to all of those who came today. Your presence is noted. We started our meeting with 6-4 and 58 against this particular legislation.
Okay, well, let's see.
Senator, we'd like you to come back up to the podium. We invite you up to have your closing comments.
Yeah, let's see if she takes another.
Thank you,
16
Mr.
to
Chairman,
20
members of the
minutes.
committee. Just a couple of things in closing. We take our oath and our responsibility to our constitutional mandate to provide the uniform, thorough, and free public education, but we're not limited by that. And I think that's a really important consideration. I think the Joint Committee and the work that we've done here on this committee speak to
This is the backdoor
the
to
senators
segregation.
and representatives'
I'll tell
commitment
you,
to
I went
fulfill
through
that
segregated
oath, the oath that
schools
we
in
all
Georgia
took
for
when we
5
took
years.
office.
And this
And
has
I
got all the
think we have
earmarks
to
of
stop and
segregation.
consider that some of these kids that we're
In this
talking
particular
about,
case, it's financial.
they're all Idaho kids.
And as was
Wherever
pointed
they
out,
go to school,
$20,000 a year
wherever they receive their education,
in the Sun Valley
these
area.
are Idaho
To
kids.
go to one of these schools.
You know, and
now they
sometimes we want to
more money from
separate
the
and think, oh, they're
taxpayers.
in this school or that
Me?
school and receiving education here or
I never
there, and
went to a
somehow that
private
makes
school.
them different or
I,
less than, and that's not
I
true.
went to
These
public
are all
schools in
Idaho
6
kids that
different
we're talking
communities.
about, and
I've seen the difference between
the other thing
funding.
that we've learned the last
I
several
even
years,
attended a
and I'll provide an
rural
example
school
in
of,
closing,
the 5th and 6th grade in the same school
is
room.
that
I sure
we
learned
were
how to
on
read.
this path to education changing and shifting and the
I
unbundling of
also listened
education
to the,
well ahead of the
6th
pandemic.
graders,
And we've been
portion
providing
two
choice
and,
and opportunity
did
for our
math while they
families
were
in Idaho
speaking.
for a long
And I read a
time,
lot
and I'm
of
proud of the
books.
work that we've done in this
And that was
in this
public
legislature.
education.
But through the
talk over
pandemic,
this,
I think
lady.
we learned a lot. And yes, people have, many people have gone back to what they knew and what they wanted, and others are searching for different options. I'll share one final story because I think sometimes we think these options may not work for certain kids. Throughout the pandemic, I had several constituents. It was about 4 or 5 families. They had a total of, I believe it was about 12 kids who they ended up coming together, forming a micro school when their school closed down. All the kids were elementary age kids. Out of the 12, 4 were special needs. And one of the reasons the families pooled their resources and hired a teacher and started something in their in a garage in someone's backyard was because the students who were special needs, their needs were not being fulfilled during the pandemic. And these parents learned that in that, when they took them out of the system and started this micro school, these parents weren't sure when they first started if their kids' needs were going to be met. And it was an interesting journey. I visited with the kids. I went and saw the little school that they had set up, and these kids were thriving. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to imagine what that different thing might look like, because we know what the thing that we have looks like and what we expect it to do. And so my challenge for you is to consider some of the possibilities for these kids and families. And the intent really is to provide an opportunity for the families that may not be able to make those choices today without these resources. So I urge the committee's support of Senate Bill 1161. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The insurance company.
Thank you, Senator.
So it's part of your,
we have some questions.
Your premium.
Senator Carlson.
So, Chairman and Senator Hartog, can you explain what the cap is per student?
Senator Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Carlson. The cap per student for a student that would apply and is deemed eligible would be $6,000 per year. And it would be paid on a quarterly basis through that digital platform. So if they were to start in a non-public school and halfway through the year change, they are required by law to notify the department. Those funds would no longer be deposited and it would not continue.
Thank you.
Senator Ward Engelking.
Mr. Chairman, maybe more of a comment, but certainly Senator Den Hartog is welcome to respond. But I was here last year when we debated Senate Bill 1255, and there were many of us that were very uncomfortable about moving forward on this because we were worried about it being a pathway forward for private tuition, or maybe there was that thought in, if we move down this path, but we were assured that that was not the case. And yet less than a year, not even a year from the point that we started with these empowering grants, we're here trying to put private tuition into this Empowering Parents program. And I would also say we put $50 million into that last year. Yes, it was federal ARPA money. And it was to address the learning lag we were seeing and to help parents maneuver back into the classroom and get these kids up to speed, because we knew they had faced some challenges and that students had faced some challenges and were experiencing learning lag. So we're happy to do that. And it's my understanding that those funds have been expended, that they have been spent. And so that was $50 million. And I would guess there's probably still a need out there. And that's why we were looking at putting $30 million into the Empowering Parents grant as we move forward to address those needs. But I would remind people that when we talk about all Idaho kids, public schools do make a place for all Idaho kids. And when they leave a private school, when that's not a good fit for them, or a private school can't address their needs, public schools take them. And they take them when a school disbands and they meet their needs. And so It's not that public schools don't make a place for every child. We have to make a place for every child, and it's important that we continue to fund our schools so that that's available. And I would also, final comment, very few private schools have a full special ed program, and it's very expensive and to run a special ed program, and $6,000 a year is not going to fund that for a private school. So for those reasons, I find this very difficult to even consider when we were guaranteed that wasn't where this program was going. So I will not be supporting this.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator.
Just to speak briefly to that, I appreciate Senator Warning-King's comments and the issue that Mr. Stark had raised. Both correct. One of the considerations in Senate Bill 1255 that we had considered last year, we had some open-ended language, and I believe the comments that Mr. Stark read to you today were perhaps even my own, if I'm recalling that correctly, and he can tell me if that is the case. But we had some open-ended language in Senate Bill 1255 that was other educational expenses, and I think the concern at that time was that could that be interpreted to mean tuition? And that was the point at which we were ensuring to say that, the board and the operation of that program at the time the board was operating it, that was not the intent. As is the case with many issues, we see things sometimes year after year, sometimes not. We have the legislature changes, the things that the people of Idaho are interested in change and evolve over time. So just my final comment on that, Mr. Chairman. Jimmy Connick.
Sure. Thank you. All right, committee, we have before us Senate Bill 1161. Motion is in order. Or further discussion. Either one, whatever you'd like to do. Senator Nichols?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
We have further discussion?
Yeah, may I just make a comment?
Sure.
I appreciate all of the work that the bill sponsors have done on this bill, and in particular to Senator Den Hartog, because I know she has worked so hard on many of these issues, and it shows. Idaho is third in the nation for school choice, and that doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen without hard work, efforts, and collaboration. And so I appreciate and want to recognize that work of Senator Den Hartog. The issue of serving kids with disabilities has come up a few times today during testimony. And I just wanted to point out that in the bill on page 4, lines 23 through 28, there is mention made of IDEA, but it essentially is providing an explanation of the rights that parents have when they place their children in private schools, which essentially equate to none. Parents do not have rights when they come to private schools. Private schools can unenroll their children with disabilities or any child for any reason without accountability. Private schools exist on the back of public education because public education serves all kids. Private schools can serve whichever kids they choose to. And IDEA is a powerful federal legal requirement that all states must abide to if they accept those federal funds, including the legal requirement of child find, which is the requirement from states to find, identify, evaluate kids from birth to 21 so that they receive special education services. And those children include children who are homeless, wards of the state, and children attending private schools. And that's because private schools don't have to serve them. I think that's an important point, again, considering children with disabilities, especially those determined to have disabilities, have no legal protections with private school vouchers. Secondly, and I feel very strongly about this given today, We took an oath as senators to uphold the Constitution. And in Article 9, Section 1, legislature to establish system of free schools, the stability of a Republican form of government, depending mainly upon the intelligence of the people, it shall be the duty of the legislature of Idaho to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public free common schools. Today, March 14th, 40 out of our 44 Idaho counties, 90% of our state's counties are voting on supplemental levies, almost $1 billion worth of supplemental levies, because this legislature has failed to fund public schools. And we are now considering a bill that will continue to take more money out of public education. I support the concepts behind Senator Den Hartog's bill. I respect Senator Den Hartog, but I respectfully will be voting against this bill because it is actively working against Idaho's public education, schools, teachers, and students.
Amen.
Thank you. Senator Nichols, were you going to make your motion?
Yes, Mr.
Would you
Chair.
mind if we see if there's any more discussion first? We have just a few minutes. Senator Lenny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a great bill, so we should just make the motion and I'll be voting for it.
No more discussion.
Thank you. Senator Nichols, I don't see any further discussion.
I'll just
Senator
make.
Herndon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, boy.
I'm not saying this is how it should be today, but we should always keep the Constitution of Idaho in mind when we talk about the requirement for a uniform, thorough system of public schools. Back when the Constitution was adopted, the compulsory attendance law adopted in that same Constitution and maintained all the way through 1972 was that students ages 6 to 18 would attend the schools and only for 3 months a year. So we have to understand we're talking about a system today that is 3 times bigger than what was constitutionally envisioned when the mandatory requirement that we fund a system of free common public schools was put into the Constitution. Interestingly enough, in the territory laws of the territory of Idaho, the ages were 8 years old to 18, and it very clearly said only 2 consecutive months and 3 months out of the year. So we have to keep things in perspective when we talk about our constitutional requirement. We have a system that's much bigger than that today. And so with that in mind, I do appreciate that the governor, his plan, which we fully funded in JFAC today for public schools, included $97.4 million additional classified staff salaries and included $6,300 per teacher in the state of Idaho and a raise that's going to put us at number 10 in the among the states. So we've well increased our teacher funding. So the money that was set aside in September for House Bill 1, we are definitely on track to put that to work. That should reduce the property tax burden among our school districts. A lot of discretionary spending was approved in today's budget, and ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 monies continue to be available to the tune of about $350 million for children's programs for the next fiscal year, 2024. So having said all of that, this appropriation that would be requested under Senate Bill 1161 does not harm the major increases in spending that we've done to public school budgets that JFAC has approved and will be going to the floor. This is an additional program. We're looking at a lot of policies in the legislature this session that cost considerably more than this. And I think this is a reasonable program to increase school choice for those students in Idaho who do not fit into the current system.
I wish you'd go back to
and
the
so that's why I will be
preacher,
supporting sending Senate Bill 1161 to the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator.
Nice
Okay, I think
speech,
we're ready for a
Sarah.
motion.
I imagine you practice in your church.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we send Senate Bill 1161 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Been moved by Senator Nichols, second by Senator Tays, that we send 1164, Senate Bill 1164 to the Senate floor.
Sorry, folks. I just can't keep
1161.
quiet on this.
1161. Thank you. Got too many pieces of paper here.
And may I speak to the motion, please?
Sure.
Thank
Let me
Whisper in
finish
his ear there, buddy.
So it's been moved by Senator Nichols, seconded by Senator Days, that we send 1161 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Further discussion, Senator Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to also thank the good senator for bringing this bill. We know we've had a lot of discussion over this session in regards to education choice, and I just wanted to add a little bit of my thoughts, is that I know that this discussion, these ideas are an adjustment in what is the norm for us, but this direction is going to become the new normal. Parents are finding out that there are options that are out there to educate their children, and as they find that there are options, they're going to take advantage of those options, because children are all individuals. And one size does not fit all. So as options become available, parents want to take advantage of those. In the state of Idaho, we've talked about private schools and the cost, and that this isn't going to help with that. Well, in Idaho, many of our private schools, the tuition is roughly around $2,400 to $3,000 annually for a child to attend that. If this helps any child to be able to take advantage of that, then why don't we want to give them that advantage? Also, we go back to the idea of that public funds can't fund private institutions. And we know that the Supreme Court has already ruled on the Blaine Amendment, and that it is unconstitutional to not allow that to occur. So we do have that in play now, and is an important component in education choice now. I feel that this is a good first step to go in the right direction for more options for education and for families to be able to have that at their disposal. I know as a mother of 5, none of my kids are the same, and they've all needed different types of educational opportunities to be able to help them progress and do the best that they can in learning and in education. So I appreciate this. I think this will help several families and students as we go about this. And again, it is a pilot program, and with that, we'll be able to learn and continue to evaluate this as we progress. And with that, I will be, of course, supporting this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ward King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may just respond to the comment about the Blaine Amendment. We have a statement from former Supreme Court Justice Jim Jones, who says that the Blaine Amendment is not dead. It wasn't overruled. In the latest Carson versus Macon, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, a state need not subsidize private education, but once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools solely because they are religious. So I think it's important to know, if we don't open the door, we have the Blaine Amendment very much intact in Idaho, and that was similar language to the case that was in Montana in 2020. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, okay.
Senator Dan Hartog. Senator Nichols. Senator Carlson. Senator Hurdon.
Let's hear
Senator
it.
Lenny.
They're all eyes.
Senator Ward King.
Turn on your mic, buddy.
Senator Simmeroff.
Nay.
Senator Lenny.
Nay.
Aye. Senator Davis. Aye.
Vote count, please. 7-3. Thank you, committee, and thank you, Senator Den Hartog.
7-3.
We have such, as a committee, such respect for you. your capacity and what you bring to
All right,
our work here in
I'm
the
sorry.
legislature. So
I am.
thank you, and with that, we'll
this is
stand
a-
adjourned for the day.
Yeah. Goodbye.